The bench was harder than I expected. That is the first thing I remember about being in a courtroom, not the flag in the corner or the elevated position of the judge's bench or the formality of everyone standing when he entered. The first thing I remember is that the wooden bench I was sitting on was harder than any bench I had sat on before, and I had the involuntary thought that this was intentional, that courtrooms were designed to keep you from getting comfortable, to make sure you understood the weight of where you were. I understood the weight. I had understood it since the Tuesday morning I had sat in my car in the parking lot of the medical center where I work and read a civil summons with my brother's name on it. Dennis was seated at the plaintiff's table. He had a lawyer I had never seen before, a man in a dark suit who arranged his documents with the deliberate calm of someone who has done this many times and expects to win. Dennis himself had a quality I recognized from childhood, the settled stillness of someone who has decided how something ends before it begins. He had always been that way. It had served him in some situations and cost him in others, and I had spent 40 years watching him miscalculate which was which. The judge opened the deed to my property and began reading. He was methodical. He turned pages the way someone turns pages when they are actually reading, not skimming. He reached page 7. He paused. Dennis had built his entire case on pages 1 through 6. He had not read page 7. My name is Faye. I am 43 years old and I am a licensed vocational nurse at a regional medical center and a part-time anatomy instructor at the community college 2 miles from my house. The house is a 3-bedroom Craftsman that I bought 9 years ago in the spring on a Tuesday morning that I remember clearly because I signed the documents and then drove directly to pick up my daughter from school, and she asked me why I was smiling, and I told her we had a house now, and she said, "Can I have the big bedroom?" And I said yes. The down payment had come partly from my savings and partly from a contribution my grandmother had made. She had been alive then, sharp and deliberate and fully in possession of her decisions, and she had told me she wanted to help me get out of renting before she was gone because she had rented her whole life and she knew what it cost you over time. Not just money, but the specific insecurity of never being fully settled. She had given me a sum that, combined with what I had saved, had made the house possible. She died 3 years ago. She was 81, and she had lived a full and specific life, and her passing had been hard in the way that the deaths of people who have been constant in your life are hard. Not shocking, but hollowing. She left an estate that was modest and divided without significant conflict. Dennis received his share. I received mine. We had stood at her graveside, and I had thought that whatever difficulties existed between us were small compared to what we had both lost. 18 months later, Dennis filed a civil claim against my house. The theory, as his attorney's filing explained it, was that the down payment contribution our grandmother had made constituted a shared family asset, that it had come from resources that belonged, in some meaningful sense, to the family as a whole, and that my receiving the benefit of it without disclosure or equalization had created an unjust enrichment that the court should remedy. He was requesting either a forced sale of my home or a cash payment to him equal to half of the property's appreciated value since I purchased it. Half of the appreciated value was approximately $94,000. My house had been good to me. I read the summons twice in my car. Then I drove to work because I had patients, and the patients did not know about the summons, and their needs were unchanged by it. I called Ruth from the parking lot during my lunch break. Ruth had handled my grandmother's estate. She is a compact and precise woman who speaks in complete sentences and has the habit, when she is thinking, of going quiet in a way that is not uncertainty, but its opposite, the quiet of someone who has found what they are looking for and is deciding how to carry it. I read the claim to her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Does he know what's in the deed?" I said I didn't know. She said, "We needed to find out what he thought he knew because the deed itself was going to end this." Ruth pulled the full deed from county records that week and reviewed it alongside the original purchase documents. She called me on a Thursday evening and told me that the provision she wanted to explain to me carefully because it was specific and it was enforceable, and it directly and completely contradicted the legal theory Dennis was pursuing. The provision had been drafted at the instruction of our grandmother's estate attorney, a man who had been handling her affairs for many years and who had been involved in structuring the down payment contribution at her explicit request. Our grandmother had wanted the contribution properly documented. She had wanted its nature unambiguous. She had wanted no room for a future conversation about what it had meant. I asked Ruth why I hadn't known about this provision. She said, "I signed the deed. It was in the deed." She said gently that most people do not read every page of every document they sign at a closing, and that this was understandable, and that in this case it had not mattered because the provision had been protecting me regardless of whether I was thinking about it. I had not been thinking about it. I had been thinking about the big bedroom. Dennis's attorney filed supplemental documents the following week characterizing the contribution as a family loan, a loan that had never been documented as such, that had never been repaid because Faye had understood it as a gift, but which Dennis was now asserting had always been intended as a temporary advance against future estate equalization. This theory required the court to accept an undocumented intent over a documented one. This theory had not been developed by someone who had read page 7. Then Carla texted me. Carla is Dennis's wife, an attorney herself, not in estate law, in corporate contracts, and she had been the accelerant in this situation from the beginning. Dennis had raised the money question once at a family gathering 2 years prior in a vague and dissatisfied way that I had addressed by explaining the down payment had been a gift and moving on. Carla had turned that vague dissatisfaction into a filed civil claim. I do not know exactly what she had told Dennis about the strength of their position, but the text she sent me suggested she had not done her research. She said they were prepared to settle. She said if I would pay Dennis $80,000, they would withdraw the claim and we could all move forward. I forwarded the message to Ruth without responding. Ruth said, "Don't answer." Then she said, the offer told us something important. It told us that neither Dennis nor Carla had pulled and read the deed, because if they had read the deed, they would not be offering to settle for $80,000. They would be figuring out how to withdraw the claim without losing face. I went home that evening and I read the deed, all 9 pages. I had not looked at it since the day I signed it, had kept it in a fireproof box in the closet without occasion to open it. I sat at my kitchen table and read it the way Ruth reads things, slowly, completely, not skimming. I read page 7 twice. My grandmother had sat with her estate attorney. I later learned his name was Herbert, that he had handled her affairs for 16 years, and she had said something to him. I do not know the exact conversation. I know the result of it, which is a clause on page 7 of my deed that says, in legal language that Herbert had made precise and plain at the same time, that the down payment contribution was a gift made in contemplation of Faye's homeownership, that it conveyed no interest in the property to any other party, including family members, and that any future claim on the property arising from the contribution was expressly waived by the contributing party and her heirs. Her heirs. She had thought about Dennis. She had not named him. She had not needed to. She had simply used a word that included everyone who might come after her and made sure that the door that word represented was closed. Ruth also found the original gift letter. It was in the files from the closing, which Ruth's office had retained. It was signed and notarized. It mirrored the deed language. And in the margin, in handwriting I recognized from birthday cards and grocery lists and the notes she used to tuck into things she gave you, my grandmother had written 7 words. This is Faye's. It was always going to be Faye's. She had written those words 11 years before Dennis filed his lawsuit. She had known. Not that Dennis would do this specifically, but that money given to one child in a family where money is not abundant will eventually become a story someone tells about fairness. She had known because she had lived long enough to watch money do what money does inside families, and she had decided that what she gave me was going to stay given. The week before the hearing, Dennis called. He did not open with the lawsuit, he opened with our grandmother, with a memory from when we were children, a specific summer, a specific thing she used to make for dinner on Friday nights. He told it the way people tell things when they are hoping the telling will do something, shift something, open a door that has been closing. He said Carla had pushed this further than he would have on his own. He said he was willing to talk. I sat in my car in my driveway. I take difficult phone calls in my car because the contained space helps me think, and I listened to my brother's voice and I tried to determine what was true in it. There may have been something true in it. He may have meant some portion of what he said. The difficulty with Dennis has always been that his genuine feelings and his strategic ones occupied the same tone, and I have never been able to tell them apart from the inside of a conversation with him. I told him to have his attorney contact Ruth. Then I ended the call. I did not sleep well that week, not because I was afraid of what would happen in that courtroom. I had read page 7, I had seen the marginal note in my grandmother's handwriting, I understood what Ruth was going to present. I did not sleep because I was mourning something. The version of my brother where this lawsuit doesn't exist. The version of our family where my grandmother's death had eventually become a legal filing. I had known, somewhere beneath my daily life, that this version was gone. That week, I finally let myself name the loss. The hearing was on Wednesday. I wore the same clothes I wear to court when I am testifying as a medical professional. Conservative, clear, the clothes of someone who takes the room seriously. I arrived early. Ruth was already there. Dennis's attorney presented well, I will give him that. The claim was articulated with confidence, the characterization of the contribution as an undocumented loan was delivered with conviction, and the appreciation argument was structured to sound like simple fairness. One sibling had benefited from family resources in a way the other had not, and the court should remedy the imbalance. It was a persuasive argument on its own terms. It just required the court to accept an undocumented intent over a documented one. Ruth presented the deed. She placed a copy in front of the judge, a copy in front of Dennis's attorney, and kept one in her hand. She said calmly and without any performance that she would like to direct the court's attention to page 7. The judge turned to it. He read. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when something is being absorbed. He read a portion aloud. The clause, the waiver, the language about heirs. Then Ruth presented the gift letter, the notarized signature, the marginal note in my grandmother's handwriting. She read the 7 words aloud. Dennis's attorney asked for a recess. They were gone for 14 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall of the courtroom, the large institutional kind with a second hand, and I counted the minutes the way I count things when I need to stay still. When they returned, Dennis's attorney approached the bench and spoke to the judge briefly. I could not hear the content. I watched Dennis's face during that conversation. He was looking at the table in front of him, and he had the specific stillness of someone who has just understood something he should have understood before he got into the room. The judge ruled from the bench. The claim was dismissed with prejudice. The deed provision was found valid, enforceable, and dispositive, meaning it resolved the question completely and finally. Dennis was ordered to pay a portion of my legal costs. The attorney made a note. Dennis stood when the judge left. He did not look at me. I drove home alone. I pulled into my driveway and I turned off the car, and I sat there for a few minutes without getting out. The house looked the same as it had that morning, the same porch, the same paint that needs refreshing on the south-facing trim, the same window in my daughter's old bedroom that sticks in the summer. It was the same house. It felt different in the way that things feel different when they have been tested and held. I thought about my grandmother sitting with Herbert in his office 11 years ago. I thought about what she had said to him. I will never know the exact words, but I know the result, which is that she had looked at the document transferring her money into my home ownership, and she had said, "Make sure this cannot be undone. Make sure it cannot be taken. Make sure that when I am gone and cannot speak for myself, the paper speaks for me."
Herbert had done his job. The paper had spoken. I had not known to thank her for it until the day I needed it most. I have thought about that, about how the most important protections are often the ones you don't know you have until they're the only thing standing between you and something you cannot afford to lose. My grandmother had known. She had done it quietly, the way she did everything that mattered. My daughter called that evening. She lives in another city now, graduate school, a life she has built that I'm proud of in the steady, uncomplicated way that I am proud of most things she does. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Great-grandma knew, didn't she?" I said yes. I said great-grandma had always known. If you have ever had someone file a claim against something you built or something you were given and found out that the protection was already there, already written down, already waiting in a document you hadn't thought to reread, I would like to hear about it. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more coming.